The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the narrow streets of the neighborhood into rivers of mud and garbage. Maria Santos was walking home from her night shift at the hospital laundry when she heard it. At first she thought it was a cat, that desperate crying sound that cuts through the noise of the city. But something made her stop. Something made her turn toward the alley behind the old laundromat. There, in a soggy cardboard box next to the dumpster, was a baby. A tiny thing, couldn't have been more than a few days old, wrapped in a thin blanket that was already soaked through. The baby's face was red from crying, little fists punching at the air like she was fighting the whole world already. Maria's heart dropped into her stomach. She looked around, hoping to see someone, anyone who might be the mother. The alley was empty except for shadows and rain. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the box, and the baby's cries got louder, more urgent. She was so light, this little one. Too light. Maria had 3 children of her own waiting at home. 3 mouths she could barely feed on her salary. Her husband had left 2 years ago, disappeared one morning and never came back, leaving her with nothing but bills and broken promises. She lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes choosing between electricity and food. Taking in another child was impossible, completely impossible. But as she stood there in the rain looking down at this helpless baby, Maria knew she couldn't walk away. She just couldn't. Some things in life don't make sense on paper but make perfect sense in the heart. She tucked the box under her jacket and hurried home. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The elevator hadn't worked since 1982, so she climbed the stairs carefully, trying not to jostle the baby too much. By the time she reached her door, she was out of breath and the baby had quieted down, maybe from the warmth of being close to another human being. Inside, her 3 kids were already asleep. Miguel was 12, Rosa was 9, and little Carlos was only 6. They shared 2 bedrooms in an apartment that barely had space for the 4 of them. Maria stood in the doorway of her own bedroom, looking at the bed where she slept, trying to figure out where she'd put a baby. She cleaned the little one as best she could with warm water and a soft cloth. The baby was a girl with a full head of dark hair and the most unusual green eyes Maria had ever seen. There was a small birthmark near her left ear, shaped almost like a star. No note, no name, nothing to tell Maria who this child was or where she came from. That night, Maria didn't sleep. She held the baby and fed her with a bottle she'd made from sugar water and a clean rag, the same way her grandmother had taught her when formula wasn't available. The baby drank hungrily, desperately, and Maria felt tears rolling down her own cheeks. What kind of person leaves a baby in the rain? What kind of situation makes someone do something like that? In the morning, Maria knew she had to report it. She took the baby to the police station and told them everything. The officer barely looked up from his paperwork. Cases like this were common, he said. Too common. They'd file a report, maybe investigate, but Maria shouldn't get her hopes up about finding the parents. In a city this size with this many problems, an abandoned baby was just another statistic. What happens to her now? Maria asked. The officer shrugged. Orphanage, probably. Foster care, if she's lucky. Could take weeks to process. Maria looked down at the baby in her arms. In less than 24 hours, she'd already started to feel like hers. The baby had stopped crying when Maria held her. She'd fallen asleep to the sound of Maria's heartbeat. How could Maria hand her over to strangers? How could she let this little one go into a system that might not care for her the way she deserved? What if I want to keep her? The words came out before Maria could stop them. The officer raised an eyebrow. You want to foster her? I want to be her mother. It took 6 months of paperwork, home visits, and bureaucracy that made Maria's head spin. 6 months of struggling even more than usual because now there were 5 mouths to feed instead of 4. 6 months of her older kids helping without complaint. Of Miguel getting a job delivering newspapers before school. Of Rosa babysitting the baby when Maria had to work double shifts. Maria named her Lucia, after her own mother who had passed away years before. Lucia Santos. It had a nice sound to it, Maria thought. A strong name for a little fighter. The social workers came regularly at first, checking on the baby, asking questions, making notes on their clipboards. But as time went on, their visits became less frequent. The case of the abandoned baby was closed, marked as unsolved. No one came forward. No one claimed her. Lucia became Maria's daughter, legally and in every other way that mattered. Life didn't get easier, but somehow it felt fuller. Maria would come home exhausted from work, her back aching from hours of standing and sorting laundry, and Lucia would smile at her. That toothless baby smile that made everything worth it. The apartment was more crowded, the budget was tighter, but there was more love somehow. More purpose. Miguel, Rosa, and Carlos never treated Lucia like she was different. She was their sister, period. They took turns carrying her around, making her laugh, teaching her things. Rosa was especially protective, like a little mother herself. She'd tell anyone who would listen about her baby sister, about how special Lucia was. Years passed in that way life does when you're too busy surviving to notice time moving. Lucia grew from a baby into a toddler, from a toddler into a little girl. She was bright, curious about everything, always asking questions that Maria sometimes didn't know how to answer. Where do stars come from? Why do people have to work? Why don't we have a big house like the ones on TV? Maria would hug her tight and say, "We have something better than a big house, mija. We have each other." And it was true. They had each other. But Maria couldn't help wondering sometimes, late at night when everyone else was asleep, about the woman who'd left Lucia in that alley. Did she think about her baby? Did she regret it? Did she have a choice? Maria tried not to judge. She knew that desperation could make people do things they never imagined possible. She knew because she lived on the edge of that desperation every single day. By the time Lucia was 10, she was already helping around the house more than most kids her age. She'd fold laundry alongside Maria, her small hands working carefully to get the corners just right. She'd help Carlos with his homework, patient and kind even when he didn't understand something the first time. She never complained about the cramped apartment or the fact that they couldn't afford the things other kids had. But Maria could see something in Lucia's eyes sometimes, a kind of wondering, a sense that she was different somehow, even if she couldn't put her finger on how or why. Maria had always planned to tell her the truth when she was old enough to understand, that she was found, not born into this family, that Maria wasn't her biological mother, but her mother in every way that counted. She just didn't know when that right time would be, or how to find the words to explain it in a way that wouldn't hurt. Lucia was 16 when everything started to change, though she didn't know it yet. She'd grown into a beautiful young woman, tall and graceful despite the hard life she'd lived. Those unusual green eyes of hers seemed to see right through people, to understand things that others missed. She'd finished school at the top of her class, but college was out of the question. There was no money for that. Instead, she did what everyone in her family did. She worked. Her first job was at the same laundromat where Maria had worked for years. Lucia would sort clothes, run the machines, fold endless piles of sheets and towels. The work was hot and monotonous, but she never complained. She'd put on her headphones and lose herself in music, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered to places far beyond those four walls. But the laundromat didn't pay enough, not even close, so Lucia took a second job cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods on the other side of the city. This was different work, more personal somehow. She'd ride 2 buses to get there, watching the city transform around her from crumbling buildings and broken sidewalks to tree-lined streets and houses that looked like palaces. The first time she walked into one of those houses, Lucia couldn't believe people actually lived like that. Marble floors, chandeliers, rooms that served only one purpose. A dining room just for eating. A living room just for sitting. Back home, their one main room was kitchen, dining room, and living room all in one. The families were usually kind to her, in that distant way that people are kind to someone they consider beneath them. They'd leave her money on the counter with a note about what needed extra attention. They'd thank her politely when she left, but they never really saw her, not as a real person with dreams and thoughts and a life outside of cleaning their toilets. Lucia didn't mind. The invisibility gave her a strange kind of freedom. She could observe these people, learn how they lived, understand a world that was completely foreign to her own. She'd notice the photos on their walls, the books on their shelves, the way they talked to each other when they thought she couldn't hear. One of her regular clients was an elderly woman named Señora Beatriz Almeida. Her house was the grandest of all, a 3-story mansion with a garden that seemed to go on forever. Señora Almeida was different from the others. She'd actually talk to Lucia, ask her about her family, her life. She'd insist Lucia call her Beatriz, though Lucia could never quite bring herself to drop the respectful title. "You remind me of someone," Beatriz said one day, watching Lucia dust the bookshelf in her study. "I can't quite put my finger on who." Lucia smiled politely and kept working. Old people were always saying things like that, but it kept happening. Every week when Lucia came to clean, Beatrice would watch her with this puzzled expression, like she was trying to solve a riddle. It made Lucia a little uncomfortable, but she needed the job so she didn't say anything. Then came the day that changed everything. Lucia was cleaning the hallway, working her way past the dozens of family portraits that lined the walls. She'd seen them 100 times before, never paying much attention. Old people in old-fashioned clothes, stern faces staring out from expensive frames. But that day, something made her stop. There was a portrait of a young woman, maybe in her 20s, wearing a white dress and pearls. She was beautiful in an understated way, with a gentle smile that seemed sad somehow. But it wasn't her beauty that made Lucia freeze in place. It was her face, her eyes. The woman in the painting had the same unusual green eyes Lucia had, the same widow's peak at her hairline, the same small birthmark near her left ear, shaped like a star. Lucia stood there with her dustcloth in hand, staring at the portrait, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. It had to be a coincidence. People could look alike without being related. The world was full of doubles and doppelgangers. But something deep in her gut told her this was different. This was important. "That's my daughter, Isabella," Lucia jumped. She hadn't heard Beatrice come up behind her. The old woman stood there, staring at the portrait with an expression of such profound sadness that Lucia felt her eyes prick with tears, just from witnessing it. "She died 23 years ago," Beatrice continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Giving birth. They told me the baby died too, a little girl. I never even got to hold her, 23 years ago. Lucia would be 23 in a few months." "I'm so sorry," Lucia managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Beatrice finally tore her gaze away from the portrait and looked at Lucia. Really looked at her. The color drained from the old woman's face. "Dear God," she breathed. "How old are you, child?" "I'll be 23 in March. And your mother? Your family?" Lucia felt like she was moving through water, everything slow and surreal. "My mother, Maria, she found me. When I was a baby, I was abandoned." The hallway seemed to tilt. Beatrice reached out and gripped Lucia's arm. Not hard but firmly, like she needed something solid to hold on to. "Where?" Beatrice's voice was urgent now. "Where did she find you?" "Behind a laundromat. In a cardboard box. In the rain." The words felt rehearsed because they were. Maria had told her the story so many times. "The police investigated but never found out who my birth parents were." Beatrice's legs seemed to give out. Lucia caught her, helping her to a nearby chair, her training as a caretaker kicking in automatically. She got water, made sure the old woman was breathing properly, all while her own mind was spinning out of control. When Beatrice could speak again, her words came out in a rush. "The hospital. The private hospital where Isabella died. It was called Santa Teresa. The doctor was named Rocha, Dr. Augusto Rocha. He told me my granddaughter had died. He said there were complications, that everything happened so fast that I couldn't see the body, because it was too traumatic. He was so convincing, so sympathetic. I never questioned it. I was drowning in grief. I couldn't think straight." She looked up at Lucia with tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "But you look exactly like her. Exactly like my Isabella. Those eyes, that birthmark. I noticed the first time you came here, but I told myself I was being foolish. An old woman seeing ghosts. But what if you're not a ghost? What if you're real?" Lucia couldn't speak, couldn't move. This had to be crazy. Things like this didn't happen in real life. They happened in soap operas and fairy tales, in stories people told but didn't actually believe. "We need to find out," Beatrice said, her voice stronger now, determined. "We need to know the truth. Will you let me help you? Will you let me try?" Lucia thought about Maria, about the woman who'd raised her with nothing but love and sacrifice, about the family who'd taken her in when no one else wanted her. Would knowing the truth change any of that? Would it matter who she'd been born to when she already knew who she belonged to? But she also thought about the woman in the portrait, about Isabella who'd died without ever holding her baby, about this old woman who'd spent 23 years mourning a granddaughter she'd never met. Didn't they deserve to know the truth too? "Yes," Lucia heard herself say. "Let's find out." The next few weeks felt like living in a dream and a nightmare at the same time. Beatrice moved fast, hiring lawyers and private investigators who started digging into records from 23 years ago. Lucia went through the motions of her daily life, cleaning houses, sorting laundry, helping Maria at home. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. She hadn't told Maria yet. Didn't know how to. How do you tell the woman who saved your life that you might have found your biological family? How do you say that without it sounding like everything she did wasn't enough? The investigators found things quickly. Too quickly. It turned out that Santa Teresa Hospital had been at the center of a massive scandal in the late 90s. Dr. Augusto Rocha, the man who delivered Isabella's baby, had been accused of running an illegal adoption ring. He told young mothers their babies had died, told wealthy families their babies hadn't survived, and then sold healthy infants to desperate people willing to pay. The case had made headlines for a few months before Rocha fled the country, and the story died down. Some babies had been recovered and returned to their families, but most had never been found. The records were incomplete, deliberately destroyed. It was one of those terrible truths that people prefer to forget because remembering hurts too much. Lucia felt sick reading the reports. She wasn't just an abandoned baby. She was a stolen one. Somewhere in this twisted story, someone had taken her from her dying mother and thrown her away like garbage. Or maybe sold her and the buyer had gotten scared. Or maybe 100 other horrible scenarios she couldn't stop imagining. Beatrice wanted to do a DNA test. It was the only way to know for certain. Lucia agreed, even though her hands shook when the nurse took her blood sample. Even though she felt like she was betraying Maria somehow, like she was saying that biology mattered more than love. The wait for the results was excruciating. 10 days that felt like 10 years. Lucia threw herself into work, exhausting herself so completely that she'd fall asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. Too tired to lie awake wondering what the test would say. She was at the laundromat, loading a washer with hotel sheets when Beatrice called. "Lucia." The old woman's voice was shaking. "The results are back. You're her. You're Isabella's daughter. You're my granddaughter." The sheets fell from Lucia's hands. Around her, the machines kept churning. People kept talking, life kept moving, but she felt frozen in place. It was real. It was all real. "I need to see you," Beatrice said. "Can you come to the house, please?" Lucia left work early for the first time in her life. She sat on the bus in a daze, watching the city blur past the window. When she arrived at the mansion, Beatrice was waiting at the door. The moment Lucia stepped inside, the old woman pulled her into a fierce hug. "My granddaughter," Beatrice kept saying over and over. "My sweet girl, you're alive. You're here." They sat in the living room and Beatrice told her everything. About Isabella, who'd been beautiful and kind and wanted to be a teacher. About how she'd gotten pregnant at 22 by a man who'd left the moment he found out. About how Beatrice had promised to help her raise the baby. How excited they'd both been despite the difficult circumstances. About the phone call from the hospital saying there had been complications. About arriving to find her daughter already gone, wrapped in white sheets, the staff so somber and final. About the doctor with the kind eyes who'd explained that sometimes these things happen, that the baby's heart had stopped, that it was peaceful, that there was nothing anyone could have done. All lies. All of it. "She wanted to name you Sophia," Beatrice said, tears rolling down her face, "after her grandmother. But Lucia is beautiful too. It suits you." Lucia felt like she was splitting into two people. Part of her wanted to embrace this, to be Sophia Almeida, granddaughter and heir. Part of her wanted to run back to the cramped apartment where Maria and her siblings were waiting, back to the life she understood. "There's something else you need to know," Beatrice said carefully, "about your family, about what this means for you." The Almeida family was wealthy. Not just comfortable, but truly wealthy. They owned textile factories, commercial properties, investments that spanned the country. Isabella had been the only child, which meant Lucia was the only direct heir. Beatrice's lawyers had already confirmed it. Everything the old woman owned would eventually belong to Lucia. The numbers Beatrice mentioned made Lucia's head spin. She couldn't even conceptualize that much money. It seemed fake, like monopoly money, not something that actually existed in the real world where people worked 12-hour shifts to afford rice and beans. "I don't know what to do," Lucia admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to be this person." Beatrice took her hands. "You don't have to decide everything today. We'll figure it out together. But Lucia, I need you to understand something. This isn't about money or inheritance. You're not just some heir to me. You're my granddaughter. You're all I have left of Isabella. I've spent 23 years thinking you were dead, and now you're here, alive and real, and so much like her it makes my heart ache. That's what matters to me, not the money, you. That night, Lucia finally told Maria everything. She sat at their small kitchen table and explained it all. The words tumbling out in a confused rush. The portrait, the investigation, the DNA test, the results. She kept saying, "You're still my mother. You'll always be my mother." She kept waiting for Maria to get angry or hurt or upset. But Maria just listened, her hands folded in her lap, that calm expression on her face that Lucia knew so well. When Lucia finally finished talking, exhausted and close to tears, Maria reached across the table and cupped her face. "Misha," she said gently, "did you think I would be angry? Did you think I would feel like you were replacing me? I don't know, maybe. I'm scared. Lucia, listen to me. I found you in a box in the rain. I knew from that very first moment that you came from somewhere. From someone. I knew your story didn't start with me, but I'm so grateful, so incredibly grateful, that I got to be part of it, that I got to raise you and love you and watch you become this amazing woman. You're my real mother," Lucia insisted, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, I am, and nothing will ever change that." But Lucia, that old woman, she lost her daughter and her granddaughter on the same day. She's been living with that grief for more than 20 years. If you can give her some peace, some happiness, don't you think that's a beautiful thing? Don't you think your birth mother would want that for her own mother? What if everything changes? What if I don't fit in with them? What if I become someone different? Maria smiled. "You're worried about becoming someone different? Mia, you've been cleaning their toilets for 2 years and you're still the same kind, hard-working girl you've always been. A DNA test and some money aren't going to change who you are. Only you can decide who you want to be." They talked through the night until the sun started coming up and Carlos wandered into the kitchen looking for breakfast. Lucia felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. She didn't have all the answers yet, but at least she wasn't carrying this secret alone anymore. Over the following weeks, Lucia started spending more time with Beatriz, learning about the family she'd come from. The old woman showed her photo albums full of Isabella, videos of birthday parties and graduations, letters she'd written. Lucia stared at her birth mother's face, trying to feel some connection, some recognition. But Isabella was a stranger. A beautiful, tragic stranger who'd given Lucia life but not a life with her. The person who felt real was Beatriz. Despite the mansion and the money and the completely different world she inhabited, there was something genuine about her grief, her joy at finding Lucia, her desperate desire to make up for lost time. The media found out about Lucia's story 3 months after the DNA results came back. One of Beatriz's staff members, a housekeeper who'd worked there for years, sold the story to a tabloid for money. It made the front page of every newspaper in the city, every news website, every gossip show on television. "Lost heiress found after 23 years, the headlines screamed. "From poverty to riches, the abandoned baby who became a millionaire." Suddenly, Lucia couldn't leave her apartment without reporters shoving microphones in her face. They camped outside Maria's building, outside the laundromat, outside Beatriz's mansion. They wanted to know everything. How did it feel to discover she was rich? What was she going to do with the money? Did she blame her grandmother for not looking harder? What did she think about the doctor who'd stolen her? The attention was suffocating. Cameras followed her everywhere. Strangers recognized her on the street and wanted to take selfies or ask for money. People she'd never met suddenly claimed to be old friends, distant cousins, anyone with a tenuous connection trying to get close to her newfound wealth. At work, everything changed. Her bosses at the laundromat were suddenly overly friendly, offering her time off she hadn't asked for. The families whose houses she cleaned treated her differently, some with awkward kindness, others with barely concealed resentment that their cleaning lady was now richer than they were. She ended up quitting both jobs because it became impossible to do her work with people treating her like a circus attraction. Beatriz tried to help, hiring security to keep the reporters at bay, having her lawyers issue statements asking for privacy. But the story was too juicy, too perfect. People couldn't get enough of it. The comments online were brutal. Some people said Lucia was lying, that she was a fraud taking advantage of a lonely old woman. Others said she was greedy, ungrateful, that she should be ashamed of herself for taking money she didn't earn. Still others pitied her, talked about her like she was a project, a poor girl who needed to be civilized and taught how to act like she belonged in high society. The Almeida extended family was even worse. Isabella had been an only child, but Beatriz had siblings, nephews, and nieces who'd been expecting to inherit everything. Suddenly, there was an unknown heir, and they were not happy about it. Some of them challenged the DNA results, demanded their own tests, hired lawyers to find loopholes. Others tried to befriend Lucia, their smiles fake and their eyes calculating, always angling for something. Family dinners at Beatriz's mansion became exercises in endurance. Lucia would sit at that long dining table, surrounded by people in expensive clothes discussing things she didn't understand, using words she'd never heard. They'd correct her grammar, her posture, her table manners. They'd ask invasive questions about her life before, about Maria and her siblings, making it clear they thought she came from inferior stock. "You eat like a peasant," one cousin told her during dessert, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Someone should teach you proper etiquette before you embarrass yourself at a real event." Lucia had wanted to throw her wine in his face. Instead, she'd put down her fork and excused herself to the bathroom, where she'd cried silently into a towel. Beatriz tried to protect her, but she was old and couldn't fight every battle. She hired tutors to teach Lucia about the family business, about finance and investments and legal matters. She brought in etiquette coaches, style consultants, people who were supposed to help Lucia transition into this new life. But every lesson felt like a judgment, like proof that she wasn't good enough as she was. The worst part was the distance growing between Lucia and her real family. She'd moved into a small apartment of her own, something modest by Almeida standards but luxurious compared to where she'd grown up. She'd done it partly for privacy, partly because the reporters made staying with Maria impossible. But it felt wrong. She missed the crowded apartment, missed Carlos's bad jokes and Rosa's constant chatter and Miguel's quiet steadiness. She tried to visit regularly, but everything was different now. Her siblings looked at her like she was a stranger. They were proud of her, they said, but there was something else in their eyes. Distance, like she'd gone somewhere they couldn't follow. "You don't have to pretend anymore," Rosa said one evening when Lucia stopped by for dinner. "You don't have to act like you're still one of us." "I am one of you," Lucia insisted. "Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Rosa replied, not unkindly. "And that's okay. But don't act like it hasn't." Maria was the only one who seemed to understand the impossible position Lucia was in. "You're stuck between two worlds," she said. "Not poor enough for one, not rich enough for the other." "That's hard, mija. It's lonely." "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore," Lucia admitted. "When I'm with Beatriz's family, they treat me like I'm not good enough. When I come here, everyone treats me like I don't belong anymore. I feel like I'm failing at being both people." "Then maybe you need to stop trying to be what everyone else wants and figure out who you actually are," Maria suggested. "Not Sofia Almeida. Not Lucia Santos. Just Lucia. Just you, but who was that?" Lucia felt like she'd lost herself somewhere in the transition. The girl who'd worked at the laundromat and cleaned houses was gone, but she hadn't been replaced by anyone new. She was just floating, untethered, trying to learn a language she didn't speak and play a game where no one had explained the rules. The business meetings were the worst. Beatriz had started bringing Lucia to board meetings for the textile company, wanting her to learn how everything worked. Lucia would sit there in a borrowed designer suit, trying to follow conversations about profit margins and market shares and stakeholder interests. The other board members, all men in their 50s and 60s, would look at her with barely disguised contempt. "What does she think about this?" one of them asked during a discussion about factory wages, gesturing at Lucia like she wasn't in the room. Beatriz's voice was sharp. "She has a name, and she has every right to be here, does she? She's been one of us for what, 4 months? What could she possibly contribute to this conversation?" Something in Lucia snapped. All the weeks of being looked down on, of being treated like she was stupid or worthless, came boiling to the surface. "I think," she said, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding, "that the workers in your factories make poverty wages. I think they work in unsafe conditions. I think the reason your profit margins are so high is because you're cutting corners on the people who actually make your products. I know this because I was one of those people. I've lived the life your workers live, and it's not sustainable. So maybe instead of worrying about whether I belong in this room, You should worry about whether you're running a company that treats people like human beings." The silence that followed was deafening. The board members stared at her, some shocked, some angry. Beatrice had a small smile on her face. "Perhaps," Beatrice said into the quiet. "That's exactly the kind of perspective this board has been lacking." After the meeting, Beatrice pulled Lucia aside. "That was brave," she said. "And you were absolutely right. But be careful, Mia. These men don't like being challenged, especially not by someone they see as an outsider." "I am an outsider," Lucia said. "Maybe I'll always be one. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Something shifted in her that day. She stopped trying so hard to fit in, stopped letting people make her feel small. If they were going to look down on her anyway, she might as well be herself. It took almost a year, but slowly Lucia found her footing. She stopped attending the dinners with extended family members who treated her poorly. She stopped apologizing for not knowing which fork to use. She stopped trying to hide where she came from or who she'd been before the DNA test changed everything. Instead, she started using her position for something meaningful. She'd been given access to her inheritance, a staggering amount of money that still didn't feel real. Her first act was to buy Maria a house, not a mansion, but a real house with 3 bedrooms and a yard, in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Maria had cried when Lucia handed her the keys. "It's too much," Maria had protested. "It's not nearly enough," Lucia replied. "You saved my life, Mon. You gave me everything when you had nothing to give. This is the least I can do." She set up trust funds for Miguel, Rosa, and Carlos, enough to pay for their education and give them a start in life. Miguel was studying engineering now. Rosa was in nursing school. Carlos was still in high school, but already talking about becoming a teacher. Watching them thrive, knowing she could help make their dreams possible, felt better than anything else in this strange new life. But Lucia didn't stop there. She kept thinking about what she'd said in that board meeting, about the workers in the factories. She started visiting the textile plants, talking to the people who worked there. She heard their stories, learned about their struggles. Low pay, long hours, dangerous equipment, no job security. They reminded her of Maria, of herself, of everyone she'd grown up around. So she started making changes, real changes. She pushed for higher wages, better safety equipment, reasonable work hours. The board fought her on everything, told her she was being naive, that it wasn't economically feasible. But Lucia had something they didn't have: Beatrice's support. The old woman had been running the company conservatively for years, but seeing Lucia's passion reignited something in her. Together, they restructured the entire operation. They implemented fair wages, improved conditions, created pathways for workers to advance. Yes, profit margins went down initially. Yes, investors complained. But employee retention went up. Productivity improved. And slowly, the company's reputation transformed from a business that exploited workers to one that treated them with dignity. Lucia also started a foundation. She called it the Isabella Almeida Foundation, after the mother she'd never known. Its mission was to help children in foster care and to investigate cases of illegal adoptions. They hired lawyers to track down records from the scandal that had stolen Lucia's first few days of life. They found other families, other children who'd been taken. Some reunions were possible, others weren't. But at least the truth was being told. The work was hard and often heartbreaking, but it gave Lucia purpose. She wasn't just a rich heiress anymore. She was someone who understood what it meant to have nothing, and she was using her privilege to lift others up. Her relationship with Beatrice deepened during this time. The old woman wasn't just her grandmother by blood. She became a true mentor, teaching Lucia not about etiquette or business protocol, but about integrity and responsibility. They'd have dinner together twice a week, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. "Isabella would be so proud of you," Beatrice told her one evening. "Not because you're rich or successful, but because you haven't forgotten where you came from. Because you use your power to help people instead of just accumulating more." "I think about her sometimes," Lucia admitted, "about what she would have been like as a mother. If we would have had a good relationship. She would have loved you fiercely," Beatrice said with certainty. "She had the biggest heart of anyone I knew. That's where you get it from, I think. Not from me. I was always too practical, too focused on business. But Isabella, she felt everything deeply, just like you do." Lucia's relationship with Maria remained strong, maybe even stronger than before. They talked on the phone every day. Lucia visited at least once a week, usually bringing food and sitting at Maria's kitchen table like she always had. With Maria, she could just be herself. No pretense, no performance, just the daughter she'd always been. "I'm proud of you, mija," Maria said during one of those visits. "Not for the money or the fancy title. I'm proud of you for staying kind, for remembering where you came from and using it to help others. That takes real strength." "I learned it from you," Lucia replied. "You're the strongest person I know." 3 years after finding out the truth about her birth, Lucia stood in front of a community center she'd funded in the neighborhood where she'd grown up. It offered job training, childcare, literacy classes, and legal aid to families struggling with poverty. The sign above the door read, "Maria Santos Community Center." Maria stood beside her, tears streaming down her face as the ribbon was cut. The whole neighborhood had turned out for the opening. People Lucia had known her whole life, celebrating not just the building, but what it represented. "Why did you name it after me?" Maria asked quietly. "Because you're the reason I'm here," Lucia said simply. "You're the reason any of this is possible. You could have walked past that alley in the rain. You could have left me there, but you didn't. You chose to save me even when it made your life harder, even when you had every reason not to. That choice changed my life, and now I get to help change other people's lives. It all starts with you, Mai. Always." Later that evening, back at Beatrice's mansion for a quiet dinner, Lucia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from an abandoned baby in a cardboard box to an heiress with more money than she'd ever dreamed of, from Lucia Santos to Sofia Almeida and back to Lucia again, but a different Lucia than she'd been before. She'd learned that identity wasn't something you were born with or something someone else could give you. It was something you built yourself piece by piece through the choices you made and the values you held on to. She was Maria's daughter and Isabella's daughter and Beatrice's granddaughter. She was the girl who'd cleaned toilets and the woman who sat on corporate boards. She was from the favela and from one of the most powerful families in the country. All of it was true. All of it was her. "You know what I think?" Beatrice said, watching Lucia from across the dinner table. "I think you got the best of both worlds. You got Isabella's compassion and Maria's strength. You got the opportunities that money can provide, but also the perspective that struggle teaches. That makes you special, Lucia. Not the inheritance or the name. You." Lucia smiled. For the first time since this whole journey began, she felt like she knew exactly who she was. Not perfect, not fully belonging to one world or the other, but uniquely herself. A bridge between two lives, carrying the lessons from both. And maybe that was the real treasure she'd found. Not wealth or status or even the truth about her birth, but the understanding that love came in many forms. That family was built through choices as much as blood, and that the greatest gift you could give was to use whatever advantages you had to make life better for others. 5 years had passed since that rainy night when everything changed. Lucia stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, looking out over the city that had given her 2 completely different lives. At 28, she'd grown into her role in ways she never imagined possible. The girl who once felt like she didn't belong anywhere had become a woman who belonged to herself. The textile company had transformed under her leadership. When Beatrice retired last year, handing over the CEO position to Lucia, many people doubted she could handle it. They were wrong. The company was thriving, not despite her changes, but because of them. Fair wages and good working conditions turned out to be good for business. Who would have thought? Lucia smiled at the irony. Her phone buzzed. It was Rosa, now a registered nurse at the city hospital. "Don't forget Sunday dinner, Hermana. Carlos is bringing his girlfriend and Mai is making your favorite." Lucia texted back a heart emoji. Sunday dinners at Maria's house were sacred. No matter how busy she got, no matter what business crisis emerged, she was there every week. That was non-negotiable. She thought about Carlos, now 21 and studying to be a teacher just like he'd dreamed. Last month, he'd told Lucia that she was his hero. Not because of the money or the success, but because she'd shown him that you could change your circumstances without forgetting who you were. "You kept us," he'd said simply. "When you could have moved on to your fancy new life and left us behind, you kept us. That means everything." Miguel had graduated with honors in engineering and now worked on sustainable building projects in underserved communities. He credited Lucia's foundation with inspiring his career path. Rosa was talking about specializing in pediatric care, wanting to help children like Lucia had once been. They'd all found their purpose, and watching them flourish filled Lucia with a joy deeper than any business success. Beatrice was 85 now, moving slower, but her mind still sharp as ever. She'd taken to calling herself Lucia's biggest fan, attending every foundation event and board meeting with fierce pride. The relationship between them had evolved into something beautiful. Not just grandmother and granddaughter, but true friends who understood each other. The Isabella Almeida Foundation had grown beyond Lucia's wildest dreams. They'd helped reunite 43 families torn apart by the illegal adoption scandal. They'd provided legal support for hundreds of foster children. They'd lobbied successfully for stricter regulations on adoption agencies and hospitals. Isabella's legacy was saving children, protecting them, giving them the futures they deserved. Lucia had also started speaking publicly about her story. At first, she'd hated the attention, but she'd learned to use her platform for good. She gave talks at universities, community centers, anywhere people would listen, about identity, belonging, and using privilege responsibly. Young people especially resonated with her message. Many of them felt caught between worlds too, struggling to honor where they came from while reaching for something more. Just last week, a young woman had approached her after a speech. "I'm the first person in my family to go to college," she'd said quietly. "Sometimes I feel guilty, like I'm leaving them behind. Your story helped me understand that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting where you started. Those moments made everything worthwhile. The difficult board meetings, the criticism from people who thought she was too soft or too radical, the exhausting balance between business and philanthropy. It all mattered because it helped others." Maria was 62 now, finally retired from the laundry work that had bent her back and worn her hands raw. She spent her days gardening, volunteering at the community center that bore her name, and spoiling her grandchildren. Yes, grandchildren. Miguel had twin daughters, Rosa had a son, and Carlos would soon be proposing to his girlfriend if the ring Lucia had helped him pick out was any indication. "I never imagined this life," Maria had told Lucia recently. "Sometimes I wake up in that comfortable bed in that beautiful house and I think I'm dreaming. Then I remember you, in that box in the rain, and I think maybe this is exactly how the story was supposed to go. Maybe we were always supposed to find each other." Lucia believed that too, not fate exactly, but something like it. A series of choices and chances that led to this moment, to this life, to this version of herself that she was proud to be. She still faced challenges. The business world remained difficult for a young woman, especially one who prioritized ethics over profit margins. Extended family members still questioned her decisions. The media still followed her, though now the stories were usually positive, focusing on her philanthropic work rather than the scandal of her origins. But Lucia had learned to stand firm in her convictions. She knew who she was now. She was the baby in the box and the woman in the boardroom. She was Maria's daughter and Isabella's legacy. She was from the favela and from the mansion. She was proof that your circumstances don't define you, that kindness is strength, that remembering where you came from makes you better at where you're going. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lucia gathered her things to head home. Not to the penthouse she could afford, but to the modest apartment she'd kept in a middle-class neighborhood. She liked being surrounded by real people living real lives, not isolated in some tower. Tomorrow she'd be back at work, fighting for fair contracts and sustainable practices. This weekend she'd visit Beatrice for tea and stories about Isabella. Sunday, she'd be at Maria's table laughing with her siblings and playing with their children. She was enough. She'd always been enough. And if her story could help even one person believe they were enough too, then every moment of the difficult journey had been worth it. From rags to riches, they'd called it. But Lucia knew the truth. The real richness had been there all along, in a woman who'd chosen love over logic, who'd saved a baby in the rain even when she couldn't afford to. Everything else was just details. The love was what mattered. The love was what changed everything. From rags to riches, the headlines had said. But Lucia knew the truth. The real journey wasn't about money at all. It was about finding out who you were when everything you thought you knew got turned upside down. It was about staying true to your values when the whole world was watching. It was about honoring both the woman who'd given you life and the woman who'd saved it. That was the story worth telling. That was the identity that mattered.